From revolution to a U.S. military pursuit, Pancho Villa's legacy is one of rebellion and conflict and the clash of two countries. Here's how his actions led to an international standoff between Mexico and the United States. And let's tell his story here. So it all starts with he was born as Jose Doroteo Arango in 1878, and he rose from the depths of poverty to become one of the more feared and respected figures in Mexican history. He was born into a poor family in Durango, Mexico, and Villa's early life was one shaped by oppression. His family was subjected to exploitation by wealthy landowners. And after witnessing the harsh treatment of his mother by a local landowner, Villa fled from his village. He changed his name to Pancho Villa, and he took up a life of banditry. His criminal activities, though, weren't just motivated by personal gain. They were in many ways a form of resistance against a system that perpetuated injustice and inequality. And as Mexico begins a spiral into the Mexican Revolution in the early 20th century, Pancho Villa emerges as a key leader in the fight against the oppressive regime of Porfirio Diaz. And Villa will fight not only for the rights of Mexico's peasants and workers, but also for the redistribution of land. Villa, he ended up leading a large and loyal army known as the División del Norte, the Division of the North. And he became one of the most prominent commanders in the revolution. His charisma and his leadership on the battlefield earned him both admiration and fear, making him kind of a symbol of hope for the oppressed, but also kind of a target for those that were in power. He wasn't just a military leader. He was trying to be a champion for the rights of the poor. His army, which was composed mostly of peasants, was devoted to him. Villa made efforts to distribute land to the poor and implement policies that focused on improving the lives of Mexico's rural population. His operations often involved daring raids and guerrilla warfare, where his forces outmaneuvered their enemies with surprising speed and cunning. He was a master of tactics, and he was capable of rallying forces with the kind of determination that inspired loyalty amongst his followers. However, Pancho Villa's relationship with the U.S. government became increasingly complicated. By the early 1910s, after the fall of Diaz and the rise of Francisco Madero as Mexico's president, Villa initially allied himself with Madero's government. But soon he grew disillusioned when Madero failed to fulfill the promises of land reform. So, as Villa's break from Madero marked the start of his direct opposition to the Mexican government. That's probably the best way I can put it. And as Villa's influence grew, he clashed with other revolutionary leaders, including Venustiano Carranza, who eventually becomes the president of Mexico. Now, Villa's contentious relationship with the U.S. government came to a head in 1916 when his forces launched a daring raid on Columbus, New Mexico. Now, the attack resulted in the death of several U.S. citizens and soldiers, and this move was likely in retaliation to the U.S. government's support for Carranza's government, which Villa saw as a betrayal of the revolution's goals. And so the attack, it shocked the United States, and it prompted President Woodrow Wilson to take action. So in response, the U.S. government sent General John J. Pershing, Blackjack Pershing, and a force of about 10,000 soldiers into Mexico on a mission, and this was known as the Punitive Expedition. And the goal of the expedition was to capture Pancho Villa and prevent any kind of further incursions into U.S. territory. Now, Pershing was a highly respected military leader who will be instrumental in World War I, and he is going to be tasked with tracking down Villa. But Pancho Villa proved to be somewhat accomplished at guerrilla warfare. And so his forces, numbering only a fraction of that of the U.S. troops, used the terrain and their knowledge of the land to evade capture. And for nearly a year, Pershing's forces just like scoured the Mexican countryside in an attempt to find and eliminate Villa. But despite a few successes, such as capturing some of Villa's men, Pancho Villa himself remained elusive. And the campaign was frustrating for the U.S. military, and it began to strain relations between the United States and Mexico. The U.S. troops faced logistical difficulties while Villa's forces fought on familiar ground, using hit-and-run tactics, and that just continued to frustrate the American forces. And the punitive expedition, which lasted from March 1916 until February of 1917, is often considered a failure. The U.S. military never succeeded in capturing Pancho Villa, and the campaign did very little to stop Villa's influence in northern Mexico. The expedition did cause a significant diplomatic crisis between the United States and Mexico, with the Mexican government protesting heavily that this was a violation of their own sovereignty. Eventually, under pressure from Mexico and lack of any significant progress, the United States withdrew its forces, and Villa's legacy continued to loom large, right? And though Pancho Villa was never captured by Blackjack Pershing, his influence on the revolution and on U.S.-Mexico relations was undeniable. Villa's role in the revolution, his complex legacy, and his direct confrontation with the U.S. government demonstrated the volatility of both the Mexican Revolution and the United States' interventionist policies. His actions helped reshape the political landscape of Mexico and sparked changes in the way that the United States would approach military intervention in Latin America in the future. Now, Pancho Villa was eventually assassinated in 1923, but his legacy as a fighter for land reform and his challenge to U.S. authority endured. He remains a controversial figure. To some, he was a hero of the oppressed, fighting for justice and equality. To others, he's a ruthless bandit who used violence to achieve his goals. But nevertheless, his life serves as a reminder to the complex forces at play during the Mexican Revolution and the enduring conflict between revolutionary ideals and political power. So, if you're asking yourself why it matters, why does Pancho Villa's story matter? What's the importance here? Well, the story of Pancho Villa and the U.S. military pursuit of him is important because it illustrates the deep and often violent conflicts that shape the course of Mexican history and also U.S.-Mexico relations. Villa's actions were not only a response to, the oppression faced by the poor in Mexico, but also as an act of defiance against foreign interference in Mexico's politics. The United States military's intervention in Mexico left a lasting impact on U.S. foreign policy, particularly in Latin America. Now, Villa's life is also a reminder of the complexities of revolution, the struggles between competing visions for the future, the personal sacrifices made by those who fight for change, and often the brutal methods used to achieve those goals. So his story shows how figures of rebellion can become both symbols of hope and sources of controversy, and how the actions of one individual can shape international relations for decades to come. So here's I wrap this up, right? Pancho Villa's legacy remains a powerful symbol of rebellion and resistance, not just in Mexico, but across the world. His defiance of both the Mexican government and the United States serves as a reminder that revolutions are rarely straightforward, and their impacts are felt long after their final battles. If you learned something new tonight or added some depth to your knowledge, that's what I do this for. Like, comment, follow, share, question for more things you should know by being alive. Because understanding figures like Pancho Villa help us reflect on the complexities of revolution and also the pursuit of justice. Thanks for watching.